Welcome back to the channel, where we explore the darkest corners of true crime. Today, we have 3 disturbing stories that will keep you up at night. These cases are as haunting as they are mysterious. Let's dive into our first story. Story 1. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Our first story takes us to Minnesota in 2008, where 19-year-old Brandon Swanson vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. Brandon was a typical college student at the time, studying wind energy at a technical college. He was known to be a smart and responsible young man, and he had close relationships with his family. The night he disappeared started out like any other. He attended a party to celebrate the end of the semester, but he didn't drink heavily, nor did anything seem out of the ordinary until his drive home. At around midnight, Brandon's car veered off the road and into a ditch. He wasn't injured, but he was stranded, frustrated but calm. Brandon called his parents to come pick him up. He told them he was near the small town of Lind, a rural area surrounded by open fields and wooded patches. His parents immediately got in their car to look for him. During their phone conversation, Brandon stayed on the line with his father, guiding him and his mother toward his location. He described landmarks and insisted he knew where he was, but strangely, his parents couldn't find him anywhere. They drove up and down the roads, calling out for him through the night. As the minutes turned into hours, tensions grew, and Brandon became increasingly frustrated. He was certain he was near Lind, but no matter where his parents searched, they couldn't locate him. After a few hours, Brandon spotted what he thought were the distant lights of a nearby town, telling his father that he was going to walk toward them. As he walked, Brandon kept talking with his father until suddenly, without warning, he uttered the words, "Oh shit," and the call abruptly ended. That was the last time anyone heard from Brandon Swanson. His disappearance triggered one of the largest search efforts in Minnesota's history. Authorities scoured the area where his car was found, searching through fields, forests, and rivers, but there was no sign of Brandon or any clues as to what might have happened. His car was discovered far from where he had said he was, raising suspicions that he may have been confused or disoriented. Several theories emerged. Some believed Brandon might have fallen into a nearby river and drowned, though no body was ever recovered. Others speculated that he might have been abducted or met with foul play, but there was no evidence to support that theory either. As the years have passed, the case remains a mystery. Despite exhaustive searches and countless leads, Brandon Swanson has never been found leaving his family and the public to wonder what truly happened that fateful night. It's as if he simply vanished into thin air, a haunting reminder of how quickly someone can disappear without a trace. Story 2. The Cleveland Torso Murders. Now let's travel back to Cleveland in the 1930s, where one of the most gruesome and unsolved murder sprees in American history took place. The city was paralyzed with fear as a sadistic killer known only as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run prowled the streets, dismembering his victims with chilling precision. The horrors began in 1934 when a dismembered torso washed up on the shores of Lake Erie. The victim, a male, was never identified. His head was missing, and the cuts on his body were so clean that police suspected the killer had surgical experience. Over the next few years, more mutilated bodies would turn up, all of them sharing similar gruesome traits. The killer's pattern was disturbingly methodical. He would sever the heads and limbs from his victims and in some cases drain their blood. The torsos were often dumped in public places to be found by horrified citizens. The randomness of the victims made it even harder for the police to track down the killer. Most of the victims were poor, transient individuals living on the fringes of society in a part of Cleveland known as Kingsbury Run. As the bodies piled up, panic swept through the city, and the press dubbed the killer the Cleveland Torso Murderer, or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The police were under immense pressure to catch the killer, but despite their best efforts, they were no closer to solving the case. The bodies kept turning up in increasingly bizarre locations, sometimes left in broad daylight, as if the killer was taunting the authorities. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was the sheer brutality of the murders. The victims weren't just killed, They were savagely butchered. Their bodies were hacked apart with terrifying precision, leaving investigators to wonder if the killer might be a doctor or butcher with a grim fascination for human anatomy. Enter Eliot Ness, the famous lawman who had helped bring down Al Capone in Chicago. Ness was Cleveland's public safety director at the time, and he took a personal interest in the case. Determined to stop the murders, Ness launched a massive raid on the homeless camps in Kingsbury Run, hoping to root out the killer. The raid led to the destruction of the camps and the displacement of hundreds of people, but it didn't stop the killings. To this day, the identity of the Cleveland torso murderer remains a mystery. Some believe the killer died or moved away. Others think he may have simply stopped killing, but the case remains one of the most perplexing and horrifying unsolved murder sprees in American history. Story 3: The Horrific Case of Sylvia Likens. Our final story takes us to Indianapolis in 1965, where one of the most shocking and brutal cases of child abuse ever recorded took place. This is the tragic story of 16-year-old Sylvia Likens, whose life was cruelly cut short by unimaginable torment. Sylvia's parents were carnival workers who moved frequently, making it difficult for them to care for their children. So they arranged for Sylvia and her sister Jenny to stay with a woman named Gertrude Banaszewski and her 7 children while they traveled for work. For $20 a week, Gertrude agreed to take in the girls, but it didn't take long for things to go horribly wrong. When the payments from Sylvia's parents began to arrive late, Gertrude took out her anger on Sylvia. She accused her of being a bad influence on the other children and began punishing her severely. But what started as verbal and physical abuse soon escalated into outright torture and cruelty. Sylvia became the target of Gertrude's rage. She was beaten with belts burned with cigarettes and forced to perform humiliating acts. Gertrude's children and even some of the neighborhood kids joined in. Encouraged by Gertrude to participate in the abuse, Sylvia was stripped naked in front of others, forced to endure unimaginable suffering day after day. What made this case even more shocking was how the abuse escalated. Sylvia was eventually imprisoned in the basement of the Banaszewski home, where she was starved, beaten, and tortured in the most horrific ways. She was denied food, water, and basic human dignity. Her body was covered in bruises, burns, and cuts, some of which had been inflicted by Gertrude's children, who carved degrading words into her skin. Despite Sylvia's desperate pleas for help, no one came to her rescue. The neighborhood knew something was wrong, but no one intervened. One neighbor even admitted to hearing Sylvia's screams, but did nothing out of fear of retaliation from Gertrude. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia succumbed to her injuries and died in that filthy basement. Her body was discovered by police, and the details of her abuse shocked the nation. Gertrude Banaszewski, her children, and several of the neighborhood kids were arrested and charged with Sylvia's murder. At the trial, the horrific details of Sylvia's last days were laid bare. The sheer cruelty and indifference displayed by Gertrude and the others left the jury stunned. Gertrude was sentenced to life in prison, though shockingly she was paroled in 1985, sparking outrage across the country. Sylvia's story remains one of the most harrowing examples of unchecked cruelty and abuse. Her case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of speaking out against abuse and the dangers of turning a blind eye to the suffering of others. These were 3 of the most disturbing true crime stories we've uncovered. If these tales gave you chills, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more unsettling stories every week. Remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than any fiction.